This is CBC Windsor News. I'm Chris Hensing. Thanks for watching. Our top stories. A day of reflection. What does truth and reconciliation mean to Windsor, Essex? The Detroit Tigers are on a run. Playoff baseball this week. We check in with a lifelong Tigers fan. And we look at why some Windsor landlords need a license to rent and how inspections have turned up some horrible conditions. But we begin with a story about a nightmare renter. The landlord of a Windsor household found a big mess recently after a tenant moved out. Now he wishes he'd done more to choose who moved in from the get-go. As our Jacob Barker found out, properly vetting potential tenants can be challenging.
This was meant to be a home for him and his family, but renting it out to a tenant turned into a bit of a nightmare for this homeowner. I'm Jacob Barker in Windsor, and when landlord Asif Khan showed up here early in September, it didn't look like this. It looked more like this.
I opened the door, and then the waft, the smell just, I think the bathroom had poop all over in the tub, on the floor, everywhere. I mean, the toilet was blocked, and then there's poop coming out everywhere. I mean, I don't know if you could imagine the smell.
It wasn't just the poop. He says the basement was covered in mold, and the furniture was ruined too. The tenant had just moved out, he says, after 6 months of not paying rent.
I've only seen this on movies, the way, I've seen a couple of shows where people, ruin the houses, and then the crew comes in and does a cleaning job. I thought, okay. But I never expected that this would happen to me.
Living in Mississauga, Khan never expected to see damage like this to his home. Before renting to her, he says he did do a credit check, he called their references, and he even met with them in person.
Maybe I should have done due diligence a lot more. I just wanted to, rent it out so that I'm not paying, 2 rents or a mortgage and a rent here.
Rosemarie is with the Small Ownership Landlords of Ontario. It's a group of landlords which they say are there to help other landlords. It's a group she invites Khan to join.
Vetting is a very difficult task to understand what to do, and it's a large skill set. And when you get burned, then you realize how in depth you have to go, and you practically have to be a detective.
She says that it's good that Khan ran his own credit check, but here are just some of the other steps she suggests taking. Searching potential tenants' names on Google and in court databases to see if they've ever had tenancy issues recorded in the past, creating a questionnaire for the tenant to fill out, visiting the current property that the tenant is staying at, even if it's just to view it from the street to see if it's in order, and to not just call their current landlord, but past ones as well.
We want people to have housing and a roof over their head, but they have to be able to understand the contract and abide by the contract that they agreed to.
Khan says his father lent him the money to get by. He knows insurance will cover some of the cost of the furniture, but the damage is still being worked out. He's no longer sure if he wants to move in.
Either I would want to sell it or maybe let it out. But right now it's just fixing it up is my first concern.
From a bad tenant to bad landlords, the city says there's no shortage of them. With the rentals they're offering substandard. Have you looked for a rental unit in Windsor recently? I want to know which ones you passed on, because city inspectors say they've uncovered some pretty horrible conditions. Landlords with up to 4 units in a property need a license to rent out each spot. It's part of a pilot program launched nearly 2 years ago for certain parts of Windsor. Deputy Building Official Rob Vanny helps oversee the program.
This program has not changed our position that we do have numerous substandard housing conditions in our community.
Leaky roofs with damaged ceilings, kitchens and washrooms that were unsafe or unsanitary to use, and in some cases, units where people needed to be removed from because they weren't safe.
For a better term, we've provided them a cheat sheet on what we're actually going to go and look at. And it's a bit surprising that when we go out there, we still see these really, really poor conditions.
These inspections require units meet building and fire code, as well as an electrical inspection. The city says more than a third failed their first inspection, and the city uncovered some illegal apartments.
There are numerous units that were established without the benefit of permits or approvals, which may not be up to standards. So it's confirmed that for sure. And it's also confirmed that there's a lot of pushback still from our landlords and property owners to engage with the city on providing safe housing for our rental market.
This pilot study covers between 4,000 and 5,000 units, but only a fraction have signed up. That's because of a legal challenge against the program by a group of landlords. A judge dismissed that challenge, but the same group is appealing the ruling. Until that gets sorted out, the city isn't enforcing any fines under the study. Those fines are the cost of a license plus half as a penalty, and the building department says that license fee will have to rise to recover costs. That's because of the time it takes to set up inspections and re-inspect units. They say it might go up by another $350. The study ends in February. That's when council can decide to keep it going, expand it citywide, or scrap it altogether. National Truth and Reconciliation Day, also known as Orange Shirt Day, marked by many locally. Mona Stonefish was one of dozens to participate in a march along the riverfront. She's a residential school survivor.
We're remembering the survivors and the heinous crimes that happened to us. I'm not talking about reconciliation. I don't feel that I'll see reconciliation in my day, nor will you. But we need to talk about truth and healing, and that's what's happening here today. I have a glimmer of hope because the Mayor of Windsor, Mayor Drew Dilkins, has a flag at half-mast today. That is so meaningful for those of us who've survived the atrocities of Mushhole residential schools.
City buses also tied orange ribbons around their mirrors as a nod to the day. A number of school-wide initiatives also taking place, including this display here, each feather symbolizing a survivor or a child lost. Together, they represent a collective commitment to truth and reconciliation. We spoke with the success coach for Indigenous students at the Catholic School Board who was the lead of the art project.
So there's over 2,000 feathers. When I first walked into the exhibit, I was in awe. So there's one big wall that has probably about 500, another smaller wall, and then a case that has about probably another 300 in it. So when you walk in, it's pretty amazing.
Very colorful, very impactful. That exhibit on display at Art Windsor Essex until November. Major League Playoff Baseball tees off tomorrow, and for the first time in a decade, the Detroit Tigers are in the mix. The Tigers decided to trade away several of their veteran players and turn the lineup over to a bunch of rookies, and then something surprising happened. They started winning and winning and winning. One fan on this side of the border could not be happier.
Detroit Tiger Baseball.
On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm probably 11 or 12. Well, I do know some people who are probably 15s. I'm not fanatical, but I have grown up loving the Detroit Tigers like I've loved the city of Detroit. We are now in my upstairs sports den. I'm an all Detroit fan, so if you like the Tigers, the Lions, the Wings, and the Pistons, I'm your guy. I used to skip out of high school at Assumption and walk across the Ambassador Bridge and go and watch them take batting practice on their off days at Tiger Stadium. I mean, that's how rabid I was, and I got to know the players by name, and they'd say, hey, here's that kid that's skipping out of school. I was over there in Detroit when they won it in '84 against San Diego, and I was in high school when they beat the Cardinals in '68, so I've lived through a number of World Series experiences. This is unlike any other thing.
Somebody alert NASA! The hottest team in baseball just got hotter.
And I think they've only lost 6 games in their last 30 and propelled them right to the top. It's got the baseball world spinning, their come from behind and their success. And they've got a great future ahead.
Detroit's a sports town, Colette. We're winning.
I know. I mean, the Lions are favored. I mean, the Seahawks are doing pretty well, but the Lions are favored, right?
I tell you, it's a good time to be somebody who loves sports in Detroit. This is nice.
There you go. There you go. Let's see how it goes tonight. Well, let's see how your weather goes tonight and beyond as well, right? Current temperatures, we've got 22 in Windsor and Chatham-Kent, and 22 in Sarnia, but you may have noticed something else, that it's a little bit muggy. I mean, here we are almost into the month of October, and we are dealing with some mugginess and a humidex value of 27. In fact, there were some areas in the Niagara Peninsula area where it's feeling like 29. So upper 20s in terms of how that air feels. I am just checking out what's happening to the south of us with what are the remnants of Helene. You can see certain areas like, how about western North Carolina, where they were hit so hard in Asheville, still getting some rainfall there. The heavier stuff, though, pushing up into Pennsylvania and New York State there eventually. So this not having an impact on us, and what's going to really be keeping this away is going to be this frontal boundary that's moving in from the northwest of us. So that's going to come in, and that's going to kind of knock this off, but it's going to bring its own form of some rainfall moving in tomorrow, probably more so for the second half of the day. I actually think the morning may not be too bad, other than we'll be dealing with some fog. So as we go through the overnight, we've got quiet conditions tonight, and then tomorrow morning, again, some low-level stratus cloud or some fog, and so that should burn off. There'll be enough sun early, but then becoming a mix of sun and cloud, and then we get that front coming through. And when it does in the later afternoon and then into the evening, we may have some embedded thunderstorms in there as well. The timing is going to be pretty good for that. So the chance of a few areas where we locally get some heavier amounts. Otherwise, it's not going to be that significant, just because it's going to be pushing through relatively quickly and then clearing out behind pretty quickly as well. So yes, we get into some cloud cover and some wet conditions, but then we go into Wednesday, and we're going to see a return to sunshine. In terms of the amounts, other than where I said you might see a pocket with some heavier stuff with the thunderstorm, we're generally in that 5 to 10, 12 millimeters of rainfall moving through. Now, the other thing of note as the front is coming through is that the winds will kick up a little bit. So it'll get a little bit gusty tomorrow afternoon into the evening, but then even those winds will die off as well. Overnight temperatures, these are pretty mild too. Only a few degrees off what would be a normal daytime high for this time of year. And normal daytime high, forget about it. Tomorrow, that push in front of the cold front is going to drive us to 24 degrees, feeling like 28 to 29. Remember, not wet all day. Don't worry too much about that icon, but there will be some wet weather. And then it is a little bit cooler as well as drier behind the front there on Wednesday, Chris.
Yeah, we certainly felt like fall this weekend.
Yeah, a little bit, you know, and I guess it's about time.
Yeah, no, I can tell you that, eh? Thanks, Miss Collette.
You're welcome.
When we come back, we're going to take you on the ground to take a look at what Hurricane Helene has done and the help that's needed next. More than 100 people are dead from Hurricane Helene, and 100 more are unaccounted for. Helene slammed into Florida as a Category 4 storm on Thursday, and then it tore through several more southeastern states, leaving a wake of death and destruction. Ethan Mooses got the latest on rescue and recovery efforts.
Hurricane Helene will likely rank among the deadliest hurricanes to strike the mainland United States. It's been days since the storm made landfall as a Category 4 hurricane in Florida. But the devastation there, in Georgia, the Carolinas, and Tennessee remains catastrophic.
We're still in a critical emergency stage of this situation. And right now our priority is to get drinking water and food and gas into folks so that they have the basic necessities to continue to support themselves and their families.
Major roads and bridges have been washed away, and downed trees and power lines have left millions in the dark. U.S. President Joe Biden calls it a history-making storm, and he vows to help those who've survived it.
I've directed my team to provide every available resource as fast as possible to your communities to rescue, recover, and to begin rebuilding.
There are now reported deaths across 6 states, and hundreds of people remain unaccounted for. In North Carolina, which was especially hard hit, there are 30 confirmed deaths in one county alone. Now, some residents are considering their future.
Most of the people who have built their lives there aren't going to be able to finish their lives there. And it's just really horrifying. It's sad because there's still people there that are really hard to get to, and we're really worried about all the people that are still there.
Rescue crews now face the challenge of getting critical supplies to those cut off by rushing floodwaters, as the estimated loss from Helene soars into the billions. Idil Musa, CBC News, Washington.
Some terrible scenes there. Your cup of coffee could soon cost more. The price of raw beans is already trending up. Anis Hadari explains why.
Even before it hits grocery shelves, coffee is getting more expensive, and this Calgary company is feeling the jolt.
What we've seen is a considerable increase over a year, sitting at currently 70 to 80% upwards.
Roasters like this one try to buy beans in advance when prices are lower, locking in lower costs to keep things stable in a changing market. But ups and downs in the international price of coffee have changed to mostly ups.
Which leads to our farming partners and our cooperatives realizing that they can get more money by defaulting on a contract rather than honoring pricing that they set 2-3 months before.
That's just one factor driving up the cost of Java. It's drought that's started these price increases in Brazil and Vietnam. Climate change is making the problem worse.
We're going to be experiencing more intense and longer periods of dryness or more intense and longer periods of wetness. And those now place that coffee plant outside of that optimal growing condition.
So far, producers say this situation hasn't hit consumers' wallets.
Not yet, but yes, it will. And that will result in uptick in prices on coffee down the road.
I think these price increases are really going to come into effect in 3 to 6 months.
Because the coffee itself is just one part of the price you pay, it's hard to say how much that will increase at a cafe or store. But the companies in the middle are worried.
What we do know is a market being 80% up is not sustainable. It's not sustainable for us as coffee roasters, and it's not going to be sustainable for the consumer. Just how high that market gets could depend on how dry it gets in Brazil. And that has roasters praying for rain. Anis Hadari, CBC News, Calgary.
A Southern Ontario woman is being accused by a neighbor of ongoing harassment. It came to a head with an incident involving a water gun. Charges have been laid. The neighbor says what's gone on before makes it far from innocent. The CBC's Philip Lee Chinook reports.
What was described as a harmless accident looks more planned from surveillance video. Wendy Washuk waves to Shehan Rochester, who refuses to respond.
She was at the end of the gate, giving me this Cheshire smile and waving at me. Every time I'd come down with the mower, she'd wave at me. It was very strange and creepy, to be honest with you.
She appears to ask a child for a water gun and disappears from sight. The alleged assault happens off camera, but the aftermath is heard. To the victim, it was more than a harmless prank. Regardless of the method used, he was sure of the intent.
It was to kind of strip me of my my integrity, right? Strip me of my dignity.
He says it's part of a campaign of ongoing harassment and collective bullying that goes back for years. And he says it's racially motivated.
I feel like we're targeted here, and I have a young family, and I have to do what I have to do, and my wife has to do what we have to do to protect our young family.
He's called the police 14 times. And he says the harassment has escalated since the story has gone viral to threats of violence. But he says he won't be intimidated into leaving.
Well, why should I? You know, at the end of the day, I was here first. We have a right to live here. This is Canada.
Washik stands by her story. She says she was having a playful water gun fight with a child at a party when she accidentally sprayed water on the neighbor. And she says she has no issue with Rochester.
I've never spoken to him other than, you know, going on my way to say hi for him to ignore me.
Washik says she cannot return to her job as an educational assistant until the case is settled.
We're suffering a lot for a little bit of water.
If the charges aren't dropped and barring any out-of-court resolution, the facts of this case will be heard in this courthouse. Washik's next court date is just before Christmas, which means this court case could extend into the next year. Philip Leishanock, CBC News, Simcoe, Ontario.
Calls for a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon continue. We have the latest next. number of developments in the Mideast this evening. Iraqi military officials say 2 rockets have been fired at a military base hosting U.S. forces near Baghdad. And in Beirut, reporters say that there have been 2 huge consecutive blasts, apparently the result of an Israeli airstrike. This as U.S. President Joe Biden continued to call for a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon. He was asked about the situation today.
On another issue on the other side of the world in the Middle East, it's our understanding.
I'm going to stick with this.
What's that?
I'm going to stick with this subject, but go ahead.
Well, just the fact that Israel may be now launching a limited operation into Lebanon. Are you aware of that? Are you comfortable with their plans?
I'm more aware than you might know, and I'm comfortable with them stopping. We should have a ceasefire now.
Israeli defense minister hinted today that Israel is preparing for a ground offensive into Lebanon. He told soldiers that Israel will use all capabilities to defeat Hezbollah and that they are part of the effort. Israel has now sealed off towns on its northern border. On Friday, Israel killed the longtime leader of Hezbollah in an airstrike on Beirut. Now, Israel is continuing that fight in Lebanon. The Houthis in Yemen today promised revenge for Israeli airstrikes yesterday. Israel's still hitting targets in Gaza. Palestinian sources say an Israeli airstrike on a house in Gaza killed 6 people today. Israeli ground activities in Gaza have declined as its fight in Lebanon has intensified, but Palestinians say that the Israeli airstrikes have kept up. And that's it for CBC Windsor News. Don't forget, for news anytime, you can go onto our website at cbc.ca/Windsor. You can also download the CBC News app for stories that matter most to you. And don't forget, you can watch The National. That's tonight at 9 on CBC News Network, 10 p.m. on the CBC News app. Of course, we stream as well. You can find us on CBC Gem and CBC Explore. That is it for me. I've been back in this chair for about 2 weeks now, but I am back out in the fields starting tomorrow. It was certainly fun to hang out with you guys and Colette. Appreciate you all watching. Thank you very much for tuning in, and have yourself a wonderful evening.